Welcome to the debate. So the central strategic tension that we're digging into today, it's pretty clear from the source material that this high stakes, really a two-horse race shaping up between Anthropic and OpenAI. They're both vying for long-term dominance in AGI. And what really makes this fascinating is this split in the analyst predictions. You've got Anthropic possibly overtaking OpenAI in revenue and maybe even model growth by 2027. But then OpenAI is still tipped to be the industry leader come 2030. So this gap, it forces us to ask, right? What's the real driver of sustainable strategic advantage here? Is it Anthropic's sort of deeply unified mission-driven technical focus, or is it OpenAI's sheer infrastructure scale and their massive commercial reach, which we see exemplified in that big Oracle partnership? I'm going to argue that it's the superior IP, driven by that organizational purity and focused technical success, that's ultimately decisive.
Okay. I see it well from a slightly different perspective. Look, while focused technical work is obviously crucial, I mean, nobody denies that, the chase for artificial general intelligence is, at its core, massively resource intensive. It just is. And the real bottleneck, I believe, is scale. And scale, well, scale comes from commercial power, from resources. So I'm arguing that it's the massive compute infrastructure and that kind of commercial resilience that are the irreversible factors determining long-term leadership. The incredible amount of computational power that OpenAI has managed to lock down, especially through that really strategic Oracle deal, it builds an infrastructure moat that I think will be basically impossible for others, even clever ones like Anthropic, to overcome by that 2030 timeframe.
Okay, well, my position really builds on the idea that Anthropic's cohesive, sort of mission-first culture gives them a better, and frankly, a much more stable path towards genuine AGI breakthroughs. I mean, the source material paints Anthropic as highly unified, almost a bit of a cult was the phrase used, right? With this obsessive commitment to, quote, solving software engineering and computer use first. Now, that isn't just some vague technical goal. It sounds like a very specific, step-by-step technical roadmap. They seem to want to prove AGI capability by building complex, reliable tools first, before maybe moving to the broader, sometimes more diffuse generative stuff. And this focused intellectual environment, it's already translating into real market success in a pretty lucrative B2B space. You just have to look at their strength with Claude Code and the AI-assisted coding market. The fact that, developers are willing to shell out $200 a month, that premium, it demonstrates that this focused engineering leads directly to the kind of revenue growth that underpins that 2027 prediction.
Yeah, that's a strong case for, internal alignment having benefits, absolutely. But organizational purity, however admirable, it doesn't buy you independence in the resource game. I really believe the sheer scale of that Oracle infrastructure deal is the definitive strategic move here. It's not just about gigawatts of compute, though that's huge. Critically, it includes 4 years of committed revenue guidance from Oracle. Now, think about that in public market terms. That's almost unheard of. This financial fortress, it gives OpenAI massive compute independence. And that independence is strategic gold because it means OpenAI isn't beholden to its direct AGI rivals, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, for the very compute it needs to win the race. So while Anthropic excels with maybe a narrower, deeper focus, OpenAI's ability to pull off commercial deals of this magnitude, securing the resources needed and boosting Oracle stock by 40% in the process, well, that shows a strategic resilience that I think goes beyond just differences in technical roadmaps. They've secured the foundation to actually execute at scale.
Okay, let's probe that tension a bit more, the focused depth versus the commercial breadth. Securing that financial fortress, yes, impressive. But doesn't spreading yourself thin commercially, chasing consumer bucks, search integrations, all these different product features, doesn't that inevitably dilute the intellectual capital needed for the really hard, foundational AGI research? I mean, the talent, the resources for those core breakthroughs, they're finite, right?
Anthropic seems laser-focused on one thing, proving its model by mastering complex operational reliability. That's what solving software engineering first seems to point to. Doesn't OpenAI's sort of scattered effort inherently risk slowing down the core science needed to stay genuinely ahead technically, especially if, as implied, some of their key people maybe disagreed with that more centralized commercial direction?
I'm sorry, I just don't quite accept that infrastructure acquisition is some kind of distraction from the core mission. Let me explain why. I think you're framing compute scale almost like a variable cost, something you acquire as needed. I see it as an irreversible strategic asset. Getting to this gigawatt-level scale, securing it independently, that is the prerequisite for executing the AGI mission effectively at the pace required. And the source material actually backs this up, right?
It mentions Microsoft's strategic misstep, doubting and pulling back on OpenAI's huge compute requests at a critical moment. That anecdote confirms that independence and scale aren't secondary issues, they are fundamental. No amount of unified focus, however pure, can make up for being dependent on your main competitor for the fuel you need to run. OpenAI has essentially secured a resource advantage, maybe not a monopoly, but a significant advantage, guaranteeing its ability to push forward hard through the next decade. And just to build on that resource point, the commitment they got through the Oracle deal, 4 years of guaranteed revenue guidance, that creates a financial and an infrastructure barrier to entry that's just incredibly high. It really doesn't leave much oxygen for other potential competitors to enter this race in a meaningful way. Maybe Anthropic because they got started early, but it makes it very tough for anyone else. This deep infrastructure lock-in, it's a long-term commercial moat. It's not just about having servers today. It's about having a guaranteed, essentially inflation-proof, 4-year plan for resources. How does philosophical coherence or a specific technical approach overcome a strategic infrastructure advantage that profound and, frankly, that locked in?
Okay, I absolutely acknowledge the power of that scale argument. It's compelling, but the critical question for me remains the utility of that scale. Can they actually use that massive infrastructure effectively if perhaps their core technical direction or leadership isn't fully aligned, or if the best minds aren't all pulling the same way? Remember, Anthropic was literally founded by technical defectors from OpenAI. That very act signals a fundamental disagreement, presumably, about the best technical path forward, and maybe about the leadership style needed to get there. So what if Anthropic's focused, step-by-step approach, their particular method for achieving reliability and complex function, what if it actually does yield superior model growth over the next few years? If that happens, then that model superiority becomes the new center of gravity. Capital and compute, at the end of the day, they're somewhat fungible commodities. They follow the best tech. True. Breakthrough IP, driven by that kind of unified, almost zealous focus, that's much harder to buy or replicate. If Anthropic builds a demonstrably better core engine, I believe the resources will eventually flow to them, regardless of OpenAI's current infrastructure lead. And we're arguably seeing evidence of this potential technical edge playing out right now in the coding market. That's a really critical vertical, right, for B2B monetization. Anthropic has shown clear, measurable success there. Claude Code seems to command strong developer loyalty, and they are successfully charging that $200 a month premium. That's empirical proof, isn't it, of a superior product-market fit, at least currently, in these core productivity and reliability tasks? And that premium revenue stream, well, that's the engine that could fuel Anthropic's ability to hit that 2027 revenue prediction, essentially validating their focused technical strategy.
That is a undeniable validation of their current product strategy in that specific key vertical, yes. But we also have to look at the speed and, frankly, the force with which OpenAI is using its commercial scale to try and neutralize that lead. The report itself notes that OpenAI has been, hyper-focused on improving codecs, integrating GPT-5, launching sophisticated developer tools like a CLI, new extensions. They haven't just, sat back and watched Anthropic succeed. They're aggressively fighting back, attempting acquisitions like Windsurf, seeking partnerships like Cursor to try and regain default status among developers. And probably the most telling point is that the report explicitly says Codex has improved dramatically to the point where some users are already switching back from Claude. Now, that demonstrates how OpenAI's resource base and commercial machinery can let them rapidly address technical gaps and try to reclaim developer mindshare much faster, perhaps, than Anthropic's more deliberate, maybe slower development cycle might allow. Scale enables rapid iteration and market deployment, and that can often overtake an initial technical lead.
Let's maybe zoom out for a second and think about the internal environment needed for this incredibly complex, long-term AGI pursuit. The source material contrasts the leadership styles, right? You have the apparently stable, collaborative technical leadership of Anthropic's 7 co-founders. That feels like it could be strategically superior for a multi-year foundational scientific effort. OpenAI's leadership, on the other hand, is characterized more as centralized and potentially, quote, polarizing, maybe prone to cultural friction. Doesn't stability and a really unified intellectual environment, aren't those non-negotiables for building something as complex as AGI, which surely requires immense long-term planning and rigorous consistency?
That's an interesting point about stability versus perhaps speed. But the reality, I think, of this particular race, this resource race, is that it demands ruthless efficiency and speed in commercial execution. Centralized leadership, okay, maybe it's philosophically challenging for some internally, maybe it creates friction, but it does enable the kind of rapid, large-scale commercial decision-making needed to secure vital resources, like, finalizing that massive Oracle deal. OpenAI is already a much bigger, more commercialized organization. And that centralized structure arguably allows for the quick strategic pivots they might need to leverage their scale and cement their long-term position as the 2030 industry leader. It feels like they're consciously choosing to prioritize strategic execution speed, maybe even over achieving perfect internal consensus. And in this incredibly resource-hungry environment, maybe that kind of decisive action is what ultimately separates the long-term leader from perhaps a very successful but more focused niche player. Okay, so to sum up my view, I'd maintain that Anthropic's deeply focused, unified technical mission, a mission sort of validated by the very origin story of its founders leaving OpenAI, combined with its current proven ability to capture that premium B2B market share with Claude Code, well, these are the strongest signals of future model superiority and the resulting revenue trajectory. That 2027 prediction, I think, is built on the idea that superior IP and focus are harder to replicate in the long run than just amassing compute power. And I'll reiterate my position that the unparalleled infrastructure scale secured by that Oracle deal, coupled with the crucial strategic compute independence it gives them from direct rivals, that's what ultimately determines who controls the industry down the line. Compute is the absolute necessary fuel for any serious AGI ambition. OpenAI has successfully cornered a significant part of the supply and, critically, secured a 4-year resource mandate. That, I believe, solidifies their path to being the dominant player by 2030.
So, the race clearly remains incredibly tense. It really highlights this fundamental tension, doesn't it, between trying to achieve technical superiority through focused, intellectual depth, which might give you a short-term revenue lead, like the 2027 prediction suggests, and the strategy of consolidating massive infrastructure and commercial dominance, which promises broader industry control over the longer term, like the 2030 view.
Yeah, exactly. We're ultimately left weighing strategic depth against strategic scale. The source material lays out a really complex picture where, frankly, both strategies have incredible arguments in their favor, and, well, only time is really going to tell which path proves truly decisive in this incredibly high-stakes pursuit of AGI.